What's happening, guys? This is Logan Robinson from Hear the Spirit, presented to you by NoleGameday.com. We're here live, wonderful, fantastic Monday afternoon, and we've got a lot to talk about. Florida State just hired a new pass rush assistant coach. Also, too, David Johnson, Florida State's running backs coach, is headed to the SEC and going to Arkansas. We're going to give our thoughts on what that means for Florida State and that current running back room going into 2026. We also have a little bit more further on Tommy Castellanos, that waiver getting denied for him. Mike Norvell spoke on it. We touched on it a little bit in last week's show, but there's more to talk about with this, with Florida State pursuing, or at least in contact with, a Divisional II quarterback. We're also going to speak on Florida State declining to play in a bowl game. They were a handful of teams that had the opportunity with 5 wins to go play in a bowl game, but Florida State denied that. They did not want to get involved. So we'll give our thoughts on that, along with Pat Surtain, who was just recently let go by the Seminoles. He had a strong response to that. And then we've got a big transfer portal, in my opinion, who I was high on. A freshman defensive end has entered the transfer portal for Florida State. So we've got a handful of things, D-Lou, here for our Monday episode of the week. Hope everybody's had a great weekend. But with me is Dustin Lewis, our editor-in-chief. D-Lou, as we always say, yes, the season's over, and it's sadly over earlier than usual. Well, not usual, but we're starting to get used to this, where the season ends early for Florida State, which sucks. But, man, the news cycle and staff changes and transfer portal and retaining players, I mean, it just goes on and on. It's a very, very busy December and January for this coaching staff.
It never slows down. I think the real break begins, late January, early February. But, I mean, like you said, even with Florida State no longer having any football games scheduled for the rest of 2025, there's still going to be a lot of activity. And we've already seen some of it with coaching changes as far as guys being let go, or now a new addition to Mike Norvell's staff in Tallahassee. The transfer portal action is going to heat up as well. Guys can declare their intentions to enter the portal right now, and then that officially gets started January 2nd when that 15-day window opens up. So, yeah, stick with us. It is not going to slow down here, and I got a feeling this week is going to be a pretty busy one.
Dustin, you and I were just talking before we went live. Usually, you're the one that sleeps in a little bit, and then I'm up a little bit earlier and such, but you take care of definitely the big hitter news like this. Now we got to set that alarm a little bit earlier, man. This is how busy it's going to be here the next couple of weeks going into January. It's just how it goes. But Dustin and the team do a great job at NoleGameday.com. So if you guys want to read into some of this stuff further, feel free, go right ahead. But here on the show, let's go ahead and get started. If you're here with us on YouTube, smack the like button. Also, too, if you have any comments or topics you want us to go through, throw them here in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. But let's get started here. Florida State, a lot of questions already in the comments about the new hire, their pass rush coach, Nick Williams, coming from Syracuse. It was announced today per ESPN's Pete Thamel that he would be joining the Florida State Seminoles. He spent the last 2 seasons at Syracuse, and he actually was able to develop Fadil Diggs, who ended up being a 7th-round pick of the 2025 NFL draft. I think he only had 1 year to work with him. Is that correct, D-Lou?
Yeah, but it was interesting because, we'll get into all of his previous stops, but he had worked at Texas A&M for a couple seasons. That was where he originally, met Diggs. He was a defensive analyst at the time, and whenever he went to Syracuse ahead of that 2024 season, Diggs had entered the transfer portal. He was able to convince him to transfer from A&M to Syracuse, and then Diggs has a career year, and like you said, Logan, goes on to be selected in the 7th round of the most recent NFL draft.
Mm-hmm. So going through a little bit of his career, his coaching background, he actually began at Georgia as a student assistant. He actually played at Georgia for the Bulldogs, and also was a grad assistant from 2019 to 2020. He was on staff, and Dustin can give a little bit more, some details on this, but helped haul in a lot of recruiting guys, a lot of proven talent that he was able to bring into the class. Something that, I mean, it's been a theme through, Norvell's tenure with his assistants. There's top tier talent that can probably come in and make an immediate factor for you, and they put themselves in the top 3, sometimes the top 2. But when it comes down to early signing day, it just does not go right for Florida State. But his time at Georgia, he was able to be very successful there. Held the number 1 recruiting class in 2018 and 2020, number 2 class in 2019. Like you mentioned, defensive analyst at Texas A&M in 2021. Whenever the Aggies had the number 1 recruiting class in 2022, he actually worked with Deion Sanders at Colorado in 2023, coaching the defensive line there. And like I had mentioned, he actually played at Georgia and also transferred over to North Alabama. Now, the situation here, you have Terrence Knight as your defensive lines coach, but this is primarily going to be coming off the edge there, and that will be his primary focus moving forward. But like I just mentioned, though, Dustin, I think fans, of course, they want to see development there, most certainly at your edge position. And we'll talk a little bit further about what they have in that room, where you're excited to see development happen, hopefully with Williams coming in, but also too, the recruiting side of things is something that Florida State has lacked heavily in that department, missing out on some guys. Now you're hoping that Nick Williams can come help you on that front with recruiting at the high school level, but also too in the transfer portal too as well.
Yeah, I think, on paper, it's a high upside hire for Florida State. Nick Williams doesn't necessarily have a ton of experience, only 3 years as a position coach at the FBS level. But like we've said, he's already produced an NFL draft pick. He's done some pretty impressive things on the recruiting trail. There were 2 defensive ends in Syracuse's 2026 class, that just signed last week. 3-star defensive end Jarius Rogers and 3-star defensive end Cameron Wilson. And those were both 2 guys out of the Sunshine State who Florida State offered, Florida State pursued, and they ultimately signed with Syracuse. And Nick Williams was their primary recruiter at the time. So, just shows, he went up against Florida State on the recruiting trail and was still able to get those guys over to the Orange. 4 years working at Georgia under Kirby Smart. That can only be very helpful to someone's coaching career. Then going over there and continuing to stay in the SEC under Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. Finally got his start as a position coach in 2023 with Deion Sanders' first staff there at Colorado. And then, like we've talked about, he's been at Syracuse for the past 2 seasons. So we'll see how this goes. But, I think Florida State was looking for another guy to come in and help with those defensive ends, considering the lack of production and lack of consistency we've seen the last 2 seasons. And, with that continuing in 2025, even with Terrence Knighton coming over to coach the entirety of the defensive line. And the interior, I thought that was, for the most part, pretty solid for FSU throughout this season. So, maybe that'll just help that defensive front with 2 guys putting their focus up there. I think you're also still going to have Odell over their shoulders with his booming voice. Even with him moving to an off-field role, he was still heavily involved this past season. So we'll see if this hire can help Florida State make a resurgence on that defensive front. But I think this guy has shown, he's a developer of talent. He's able to get in recruits' ears, and he's also a Georgia native. So, we'll see if all of these ties can help Florida State.
Yeah, that's got to help as well. And also, too, was involved while at Texas A&M getting Walter Nolan in there, who ended up being a first-round pick, number 16th overall, who was selected to go to the Arizona Cardinals there as well. So he's able to do some good stuff on the recruiting trail for you as well. And not that it's going to be a factor, at least at the high school level, because the class is practically already wrapped up for you. But now you really look into what he could do potentially for you in the transfer portal. How does that entice guys? That's what I immediately think of, because Florida State still needs to find help there. What they grabbed this last offseason with James Williams, we've talked about it heavily, has been a bust for Florida State. I think, yes, you feel strongly about some of these younger guys, D-Lou. We do. The Sear twins and what you have there. And maybe you could throw in Amari Williams in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
But they are going to look for a veteran guy with hopefully a lot of efficiency when his last stop for wherever he comes from in that transfer portal. That it's going to start bumping really quickly here with a lot of player meetings happening across the country. So there's going to be potential guys out there, and hopefully, you would hope that Nick Williams can help jump that forward for you, because that's something Florida State desperately needs going into this next season. Because yes, I think from the inside with Terrence Knighton, he did not have a whole ton to work with. You can say I'd say it's it was average. They did as much as they could with Darrell Jackson, and then also too with you have a Daniel Lyons, but they did not have guys back there behind those 2. Thank God, Darrell Jackson was able to stay healthy. Daniel Lyons able to go throughout the season as well. if that weren't to be the case, Florida State's defensive line would be a major, major concern. And it was a major concern for us going into the season. It wasn't a phenomenal group, but they've still got to do a better job across the board, across that whole entire defensive line, and bringing in some talent. And it's going to be a lot on the shoulders of Nick Williams off the edge moving forward this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year, Florida State, they simply did a poor job in their evaluations, and they also got unlucky with some injuries there as far as guys they brought in on that transfer haul. But that relationship between Terrence Knight and Tony White, that was a big reason that they brought James Williams over to Florida State, and there was belief he could develop from a pass rushing specialist to an every down defensive end. And that was obviously a bust, like you mentioned, for Florida State, Logan. And Alabama took advantage of that early in the season. I think from that point on, he was mainly in there for passing downs and just wasn't very productive for Florida State. And then those other two guys that they got and wanted to get some production from, Jason Jenkins, dealt with an Achilles injury, and that really seemed to limit him, even though he was able to make it back for the beginning of the season. He was just never the same. And, he's going to need to continue to recover and get his explosiveness back as he gets further and further away from that injury he suffered in the spring. And then same thing with Devontae Diggs. We saw him get a sack in that season opener against Alabama, and then I believe he was injured in the second game, suffered a neck injury, and wasn't able to return for the remainder of the 2025 season. So some busts, some bad evaluations, and then really just some bad luck for Florida State. But with what Nick Williams has done during his 3 years as a position coach, we'll see if he's able to go into that transfer portal and bring in some guys that can make an immediate impact.
Yep. And, I see some comments in here too about the linebacker room, and that's the next thing that we're keeping a very close eye on. I think everybody was shocked that Surtain was the first to be let go, but that linebacker room needs a complete rehauling all across the board. It needs a hard reset there. And I don't think the product from what you've seen from even the linebacker play, but also two special teams, has been a major lack of focus, I believe. And that's all under the shoulder. That's on the shoulders of John Papuchis. They've got to find a new coach there. We've all agreed on that here on this show. And they've got to find better recruiters that can do that for you as well. Guys that can, stick those commitments and get to the signings. And I know they just landed, they feel good about, the linebacker that they brought in this last class. And, he was highly ranked before that injury and such. And it was great that they were able to keep him in that fold. But still, nonetheless, so Florida State has lacked in that department for a very long time. And you could even point back to, it's been throughout the last couple of coaching staffs. Even there for Jimbo Fisher at the end. For some reason, Florida State's linebacker corp has just completely evaporated outside of your one highlighted couple years there with Tatum Bethune and Kalen DeLoach with the side piece of DJ Lunday. It's been piss poor. They've got to do a better job at that second level. And I think Tony White, that's going to be a big hire for him. Now, we still haven't heard, though, and it's pretty shocking. We're here Monday, December 8th, and we're well done. We're past championship weekend and everything. And is it kind of surprising that we haven't heard anything on Coach JP yet?
Yeah, I find it pretty surprising, especially, with Patrick Surtain Sr. being the first guy that Florida State lets go, and there's no other announcements after that. And then we'll get into David Johnson, but Florida State isn't necessarily making a decision here. It's really him making the decision to go ahead and head over to the SEC and join Arkansas after 6 seasons at Florida State. But there are some guys on this coaching staff that Florida State, they have to make a decision on. They're contractually obligated to make a decision on. And John Papuchis is one of those guys, along with Tony Tokarz, Chris Thompson, and I believe Odell as well. All 4 of those guys will have their contracts expire on February 28, 2026. So there's going to be something coming out on those 4, ideally pretty soon, whether that's Florida State retaining them for another season or parting ways and looking for a new hire. And, I would imagine in the case of John Papuchis at this time, it's just kind of hard to justify why he would be retained on this coaching staff. The linebackers, we thought this could be one of the deepest rooms for Florida State in about a decade. And, it was a major disappointment for the most part. And the transfers you brought in didn't live up to the standard that you expected. The guys who returned didn't take that necessary growth that we foresaw leading up to the season. And like you said, Logan, the special teams, I mean, has just been an absolute disaster for Florida State, and is a reason that they lost multiple games this season, especially that NC State debacle. And I mean, even with the defensive ends, during John Papucha's tenure, a lot of the production and development, I mean, came from guys who were transfers, and you kind of already knew what you were going to get. I mean, Jermaine Johnson was a highly regarded guy coming to Florida State. So was Jared Verse, even though he was making the move from the FCS to FBS level. Keir Thomas, same thing, had production at South Carolina before he came over to Florida State. And I understand, there were some strides made there with Patrick Payton, but all of that is kind of washed away when you saw what happened last year during that 2024 campaign. And a guy who you build up from a 3-star to a starter at Florida State then leaves and goes ahead and transfers to LSU. So, those decisions, they're going to need to be made in the near future. I don't think Florida State's going to wait until February 28, 2026 to make that move one way or the other. Well, hey, with the way it's going right now, but I would imagine.
I know that's the thing. That's what concerns you. It's from this administration. At the end of the day, I mean, we just saw the shit show that this administration has just put through this fan base. It wouldn't be, you can't say it'd be a shocker if something like that would happen. Just unorganized and waiting and procrastination. I don't know what you call it from this administration, but it wouldn't, that's a sad thing, but that's most certainly should not and won't be the case for Florida State. But I think you brought up a good point there, Delu, with, those are guys that came in immediate, I say expertise. Jared Verse, yes, he played with the lesser opponents and such, but he was on a different level. There's a reason why he was a first-round pick and defensive rookie of the year. Like that, he was proven for you. You didn't have to do a whole ton with him. Trust me, we were there at the practices, the first practices he was there. He was absolutely dominating the living hell out of any tackle that he was facing. Just wasn't even close. There was no competition there. And Florida State was just really lucky to get him. And we all know what Jermaine Johnson was coming from Georgia, coming into Tallahassee. That was a massive pickup there. But I go to a guy like Marvin Jones Jr., where, you knew that you were going to have to develop him. You were going to have to work with him to make him better, improve his play. And it was going to take a good while. Nothing happened. Nothing happened with Marvin Jones Jr. That was, it was a legacy guy. There was a lot of excitement there. Former 5-star, went to Georgia. Georgia could not develop him. Kirby Smart, if they can't develop you there, Florida State thought that they could do it on their end with JP. Just no, was not going to happen. Didn't happen. And you also saw Pat Payton's play fall off because he didn't have Jared Verse on the other side. He had Marvin Jones Jr., who, what I just said, not a bust as well in the transfer portal. Florida State has busted quite a bit outside. And now it's like 2 for 2, I'd say. And luckily you got carried by a guy like Jared Verse, who's, making a name for himself in the league as we speak. And Jermaine Johnson is over there with the Jets, coming back from an injury, but he's a solid piece for the Jets as well on that defense. But yeah, I mean, they've got to find a new linebackers coach. That's what JP is coaching now. And I think this is a solid pickup here for Florida State. I like it almost more on the side of the recruiting trail of things. Hopefully they can find some success, give them a jump there. And two, like you said, his background and, being able to recruit there in Georgia as well.
Or Nick Williams. You mean you're talking Nick Williams now?
Yeah, I'm over here on Nick Williams again. I'm going everywhere. I'm all across the board, but I think it's a solid pickup there, and he's got the background. I mean, he's able to bring in some strong talent, and I think that pickup too of Walter Nolan was huge for him to add to his resume.
Yeah, and interesting for a guy like that to make a leap to Florida State, where I mean, there's no guarantee Mike Norvell is still here after this 2026 season. But I mean, I guess Syracuse, they had their issues and
might not be in the best spot either.
Well. But I will add, just on one last note on JP, I mean, having him on staff, it hasn't come without a hefty investment from Florida State. $800,000 this past season. Do you feel like you got $800,000 worth of production from your linebackers or special teams unit?
I hate to tell you, D-Lou, but no. Nope. So that's one that we'll probably, I don't know, maybe we'll be speaking on that during Wednesday night show with VZ, giving thoughts on, JP's tenure at Florida State. We can do a great deep dive in that. I'm sure everybody would be excited to hear that. But real quick, though, let's talk about David Johnson. We pointed on that. We actually talked about it earlier last week, but now it's official. Came out this morning that he is going to indeed take that Arkansas job over there. What are your thoughts on this one, D-Lou? To me, and we've been around the program, been at practices all across the board, and David Johnson is highly liked around this program. Not only just the players really love him, really like him, but also too just people inside that building at the Moore and a lot of the recruits, families, everything. I really liked him. Got to speak a whole ton with him. He would allow me to pick his brain on things after practices and such. And you don't usually get all that kind of access, but he was very open as well and transparent. But now, he ends up, he's going to be leaving Florida State. This has been a room that has been always revolving with talent with him. Some of those guys even being walk-ons that we've talked about beforehand, like a CJ Campbell, a Treshawn Ward, who ended up being a starter for you. Was able to develop those guys and do some things. But your thoughts here on, David Johnson moving on from the program?
Little surprising, kind of like what you said, Logan. I mean, a popular guy in the building, someone that meshed pretty well with recruits, and I mean, seems like a good dude on and off the field. And he ultimately is the one that made this decision to go over there and work at Arkansas. Going to be joining up with Ryan Silverfield, who was hired as the head coach from Memphis a couple of weeks ago. And we talked about it on Friday, but Johnson and Silverfield did work together previously, spent 2 years together on that Memphis staff when Norvell was still the head coach over there for the Tigers. And now Silverfield, looking to build out his first coaching staff there at Arkansas and bringing over Johnson, which I think looks like a good hire from the outside going in, just because of the production that Florida State has had in that running back room. Obviously, sending Trey Benson to the NFL draft, and you kind of referenced it there, Logan. But I mean, a lot of guys who came in and necessarily weren't expected to make major impacts went on to rise up and make some plays for Florida State, whether that's Treshawn Ward and CJ Campbell as walk-ons. Lawrence Toafili stuck with the Seminoles after the coaching change came in and had a pretty productive career here with the Seminoles. Jay-Sean Corbin, one of the first transfers that Florida State landed out of the portal. And even this last season, I mean, you saw the promising flashes from Samuel Singleton Jr. and Usman Chroma. And, I know the running back rotation was frustrating, but that's ultimately something that Gus Malzahn decides a lot of that aspect of
And
it.
I wonder if that had anything to do
offense.
with it. Now that you're speaking, I wonder if that had anything to do. I mean, not saying that was the sole reason why, David Johnson's not going to, coach for Florida State again, but, maybe they weren't on the same line there on who should be out there in the rotation and all that kind of stuff.
I'm sure, that was quite an frustrating aspect of all of it, because I mean, even for fans and media watching, it's just hard to understand why you've got a running back out there for 1 or 2 plays, switch him out, bring in another guy. And, before the end of the first half, Florida State's already had 4, 5, 6 running backs touch the football. And it's just tough to.
You were about to go in and play running back. Actually, you had the opportunity.
Just tough to let those guys establish a rhythm. And, we'll see how it goes. Not immediately sure who Florida State is going to pursue here to try and replace Johnson at FSU, but I mean, it's certainly a loss. I mean, he was one of the last remaining position coaches that had been at Florida State since Mike Norvell began his tenure in Tallahassee. Was also listed as Florida State's recruiting coordinator, and obviously that's been a part of the program that's been a pretty mixed bag for FSU. Struggled to develop high school prospects and develop them. Haven't landed a top 10 class since Mike Norvell got to Tallahassee. I think the highest one was number 11 in 2024, and 23 signees in that class. 6 of them have already transferred. Your top recruit, Luke Kromenhoek, obviously departed from Florida State after just 1 season. So, we'll see how Florida State moves forward from here. But I think, you do have some promising talent still in that running back room if you can retain Singleton Jr., Chroma this offseason. We'll see what happens ultimately with Cam Davis, who redshirted this past season. Then you signed 4-star running back, a local talent, Amari Thomas, in this 2026 class. So whoever the next guy is that comes in, he's got some pieces to work with.
Yeah, and that's the immediate question for me, along with probably the fans, is retaining. Of course, number one, you want to have your guy Usman Chroma come back, and how does David Johnson affect that moving forward? Him leaving, how does that change things for Usman Krama. I don't think it specifically changes a whole ton. Yes, Florida State was doing a lot of recruiting for him throughout his high school cycle, but he was committed to Georgia, where they were at the last second of making a huge flip, getting him from Georgia over to Florida State. I'm not saying, though, that that David Johnson didn't have an impact in relationship, of course, with Usman Krama, but
Mike Norvell was big there.
yeah, Mike was visiting every game almost. I feel
He
like he
visited
was like the number one player
not
he
every
visited
game,
most. Not
not
every
every
game, but
game,
he
but
visited a ridiculous amount, he said.
yeah, I think at least once every year, and he had watched Chroma not only play football, but also during his basketball seasons as well. So
Mhm.
this was a recruitment that Norvell was personally invested in.
Okay, so that leans on Norvell, which gives you a good feeling, hopefully, that Retain still know on the broader outlook of it. And when we do whatever show that is, without having to talk about some breaking news stuff, these last few episodes, we will do a spreadsheet. But that's like on the broader outlook, Retain wise, Usman Kroma is still probably going to have some high interest for sure from other schools across the country. But got to retain him, and I think too Samuel Singleton as well. It just gets really interesting. I would like to see where the new coach that comes in, you're solidified with an RB1. And I think that's what really lacked out of Gus Malzahn, because we had thought coming into the season, I understand that you have a plethora of running backs. So we thought maybe he would stick with one. Okay, then you maybe throw in an RB2 if the guy needs more time. But there was a carousel all throughout the year, and you didn't even have Cam Davis in as well, where you were hoping you'd see some strides from throughout the offseason. He deals with an injury going throughout the rest of the season. He was thrown into some special teams there at Clemson, but never really saw the field as much that you definitely expected for this last year. So like you said, there's a handful of guys in there, but I'd like to see where it's an RJ Harvey type of role. If that's going to be, if Gus Malzahn's coming back, that would be the case. But then you get interesting. I mean, you've got Usman Kroma, Singleton. I think, of course, you don't have to play everybody, but you'd have, I think, 3 solid running backs with a true freshman coming in that you feel strongly about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the problem for Florida State this past season as far as the running backs. You had a good amount of talent in that room, but it's just not feasible to play 5 or 6 guys at running back every game. I think and we talked about it during the second half of that season when it started becoming more of an issue. But, I think 3 guys max in that rotation is what works for the Seminoles, just so that you can let these younger guys who don't have as much playing experience actually get into a rhythm. I maybe understand it with some of the more experienced guys like a Roydell Williams or Keziah Holmes, going in and out, because they've been in this for years. I mean, they kind of understand. But for a guy who's in his first season at the college level like Chroma, I mean, he needs that time to really get those game reps and just kind of establish himself out there on the field. And then same thing with Samuel Singleton Jr., who, I mean, really didn't play a ton during his first 2 seasons, then started getting carries the second half of this 2025 season.
Out of nowhere.
Well, yeah. I mean, you come out of the bye week and Samuel Singleton Jr. is your starting running back. It's like, what happened?
He's your starting running back. Like, what? What is going on here? I can't keep up, Gus. I can't keep up.
But that's a philosophy that Florida State, they need to re-explore this offseason and figure that out.
100%. So David Johnson off to Arkansas. We'll keep a close eye on some targets moving forward and who Florida State may be pursuing for its next running backs coach. Okay, so let's go to the main topic of the show this afternoon. That's Tommy Castellanos getting his waiver denied. Mike Norvell spoke on this last week. He said his waiver was denied. I know Tommy is going through his process of fighting for opportunity. We would support Tommy and being able to explore all things that he wants to and needs to do for his potential eligibility and playing. Tommy's situation is unique to itself. We're going to move forward for what we believe is best for competitive aspect of our quarterback position. I'm excited about the guys we have. I think they've all shown flashes and moments. I know I've talked a lot about Kevin and his time as a true freshman. He dealt with a little bit of injuries later in the year, but I'm excited about that room. I do think they have high potential in what they do and what they bring, but I'm going to evaluate all parts to put ourselves in a position to compete for a championship. So we touched on this a little bit last week, but we had a lot of stuff going on and coming in while we were live. Ended up almost having a 2-hour show, but I want to give us a little bit more time to kind of hear, Mike Norvell talk about Kevin Sperry. And we've also heard from Gus Malzahn through a lot of those scrimmages. that they felt strongly about his play and where he was ascending to. And then we ended up seeing him be QB2 this season. I know Brock Glenn was dealing with some injuries, so that certainly probably impacted that a little bit, but it certainly felt like to me, and I'm interested in your thoughts, Delu, where Gus was certainly leaning on where Kevin Sperry was your QB2, just because of the things that we heard from him and talk about his play. And he also, Kevin Sperry got a lot of burn with Brock Glenn being hurt for a majority. What was that, the spring?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Spring and I mean lingered into the fall too.
literally like the first 3 or 4 weeks as well, which limited him. So, Kevin Sperry getting a lot of QB2 reps, and it seemed like Gus leans a lot on Kevin Sperry. But yeah, Tommy, is going to fight and try to get another year of eligibility. And I thought that was pretty shocking to us that he wasn't getting another year of eligibility as well, D'Lo.
Yeah, definitely surprising to me because I mean, I know the NCAA changed the redshirt rule after he began his college career. The rule currently is four. If you play in more than four regular season games, you can't redshirt. But postseason games, conference championships, bowl games, playoff games, they no longer count against that redshirt rule. And during his first season, his true freshman year at UCF, Tommy made 5 appearances. One of those was in the AAC conference championship game. And shortly after that was when the NCAA changed the rule. So I just figured since he had been in college already and then the rule change was made, it wouldn't be very hard to argue that he deserves another season of eligibility in 2026. I mean, like you, a little bit surprised that he was already initially denied for that waiver. They're gonna try and do it again. So we'll see how the appeal process goes. But either way, I mean, just based off Mike Norvell's comments last week, and I mean, he even said it, Florida State is moving forward with their quarterback situation. Doesn't sound like they expect Tommy to be back in Tallahassee one way or another. And I mean, that's really a change of tune because in the second half of that regular season, Mike Norvell was being asked about it. Tommy was being asked about it. It sounded like there was mutual interest on both sides. But I really just think, with the way those final 4 games went for Florida State in the regular season, you had the loss to Clemson on the road, come back home, defeat Virginia Tech in the home finale, and then you lose your final games on the road to North Carolina State and Florida. With the way Tommy played in those 4 games, which I mean wasn't very good. Even the Virginia Tech game at home, I think he only completed 50% of his passes, and you were just really seeing him struggle with his accuracy and didn't look like the poised player that we saw earlier on in 2025. I believe that made Florida State have to reevaluate their decision.
Yeah. To me, this gets very interesting too. So first off, think I've said it a few times. Time to move on. Gus got his guy, thought they could do a little bit more with him. I think they were trying to see if they could maybe do him better with the passing game. Not that they were relying so heavily on that, but they were hoping at least to see some development there, some improvement, and that just was not the case. A lot of those shots taken, and when you want to talk about passing yards, all this kind of stuff, you got to remember a lot of these were just thrown up, and God, please, Deuce Robinson catch the ball, or Makai Danzy, please catch that ball. I mean, underthrown, contested, and did he take a few shots that were great throws? Yes, a quarterback will do that. You got to hope that a quarterback at Florida State can do something like that. But still, that limited Florida State offensively whenever you had a guy that was not accurate, and also too was able to let the ball go, fumbled a few times as well. And I just don't like the approach of his leadership anymore. I thought the confidence coming into the season is exactly what Florida State needed. Certainly, when you go 2-10, you need to get guys that have just simply courage going into that Alabama game. And I think he did that, but it's gotten to the point where, to me, him saying that he doesn't need to really improve on anything. There's nothing there for him to improve. That's wild. That's wild. That's crazy. That's crazy talk. He's got a lot to work on. He's got a lot to work on here. And Mike Norvell's comments on where they need to move forward, I think, is the right route. Now, when we talk about where that's headed, Florida State has Kevin Sperry. When we were talking about him, they feel strongly about him. You still have Brock Glenn as well. And now, if your brain, it's all relied on Gus Malzahn and him coming back, and it seems like things are headed that way, just coming off of the early signing day press conference, Delu, which happened while we were live on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Sperry brought Glenn, and you just brought in a true freshman as well. But Florida State is in pursuit, and they're in contact with some guys out there in the transfer portal. One of those being a Division II quarterback from West Florida, Marcus Stokes. He was originally committed to Florida and then had some off the field stuff going on there, so the program moved on from him. But Florida State, along with Syracuse, Iowa, and Northwestern, are also showing interest in him after he announced that he was intending on entering the transfer portal. He's actually a finalist for the Harlan Hill Award, which goes to the top player in D2. In 12 appearances this season, Stokes completed 223 out of 368 passes of a 60.1 percentage, and then almost 3,300 yards with 30 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. He rushed 82 He rushed 82 times for 367 yards and 10 more scores. Thoughts on this, D-Lou, and just the overall outlook on the quarterback room going in 2026?
It's interesting. This is the first guy that Florida State has reportedly contacted who intends to enter the transfer portal as far as the quarterback position. I don't think it'll be the only name to surface for Florida State. I think they're going to do some due diligence for sure. But Stokes fits the Gus Malzahn mold as a dual threat quarterback, and he's been pretty productive at the D2 level over the last 2 years. Like you mentioned, a finalist for the Harlan Hill Award this season, put together a pretty productive campaign for West Florida. I think he also started 8 games back during the 2024 season. And what's interesting about this one is there's at least some familiarity between the two sides. Back when Stokes was a high school prospect, he didn't hold an offer from Florida State at the time, but he did take an unofficial visit to Tallahassee in 2022. And obviously by that point, Tony Tokarz had already been promoted to quarterbacks coach. Mike Norvell was obviously the head coach. So the two parties, they at least know one another. And we'll see if Florida State, once the transfer portal officially opens there in January, if they're able to get him in for a visit, and depending on who else they're evaluating at that quarterback position. But I think it just shows, with this early interest from Florida State and a quarterback, that they're not necessarily confident in Kevin Sperry being that starting QB in 2026 if they're going out and evaluating more experienced options. And it kind of makes sense, in my opinion. I don't think you can put all of the eggs in the basket for Kevin Sperry just because he only has 17 career pass attempts to his name, and he's not necessarily a proven product. So I think Florida State, they're trying to get a proven quarterback to come in and spark this program for 2026. I originally thought that would be the plan with Tommy, to have him back for one more year, continue to develop Kevin Sperry, see what strides he's able to make next fall, and then have him fully ready to go for 2027. But with Florida State now moving on from Tommy Castellanos, I think they want to get another QB in the building to, at the very least, provide competition with Kevin Sperry, if not that transfer being the outright starter for the Seminoles next year.
Mm-hmm. Well, too, we gotta also keep in mind Tony Tokarz, Florida State's quarterbacks coach. That's a question mark on if he is going to stay going into this next season as well, because
February 28th.
Yeah, I hope it don't wait that long, man. Hope that don't happen. But development has lacked in this room. When we're talking about linebacker room, pass rush, we go straight to the quarterback room outside of Jordan Travis, who, Jordan Travis, now looking at it, was a special specimen for Mike Norvell to go and win you games and be a Superman for you. Florida State's got to do a better job of getting guys developed in the quarterback room, and you hope that can be done with Kevin Sperry. Yes, he had a little bit of playing time this year, definitely at the trash part of games against trash competition as well. But you did see where, okay, this guy, there might be something there, but you can't rely on that to say, hey, you're our starter in 2026. This is it. Now, of course, you can have the conversation and argument. Now, do you bring in a guy that's a pure starter and he is going to be your starter in 2026? Or do you bring in someone in the transfer portal who still has the experience and you have those two competed out for that 2026 job? That's another angle that you could go at, and you could maybe say that staff would like to, maybe go that route as well. That's where, as we continue to hear some of these names, I just don't know if Marcus Stokes, and not saying this is, like you said, this is not going to be the only name that we're going to hear of. Definitely should not be, and it won't be. But you want to have, I think, if you are going to have somebody come in, I think just because you haven't had the proven talent from Sperry, I think you give someone really high upside, someone that has experience, that has been able to play at a high level. But I still think you have a battle going into 2026. That doesn't hurt Sperry whatsoever. That would help him a ton, and also to probably help what you brought in. If you do it through the transfer portal, which we're all expecting. But this quarterback, I think we're going to talk about this quite a bit this offseason, D-Lou, on what this journey is going to look like. Because Florida State, if they want to have an immediate fix, which we heard of last year, guess what, D-Lou? There was no immediate fix, Mike. There was no immediate fix, but that is going to be, once again, the slogan for Mike Norvell, is to come in and hopefully make another immediate fix. They have to do it at the quarterback position, because I don't think Tommy Castellanos was it for you, and it showed he wasn't. And they also have to need to do this in a swift manner because of talent that you want to also grab in the transfer portal, because a lot of question marks are going to be relied on Deuce Robinson and what the future looks like for him if he decides to go to the NFL or if he's going to come back for you.
Yeah, and Deuce Robinson, I mean, that's potentially a big selling point for a transfer quarterback. And Florida State, I mean, doing their best to try and retain Robinson for another season. We'll see what he decides to do as far as remaining in Tallahassee or going ahead and taking his stab at the 2026 NFL draft. That'll be something to monitor here. And I know Florida State fans, you see a D2 quarterback. It's definitely not something that's very exciting for the fan base. But I mean, hey, Lane Kiffin made a pretty underrated move last offseason, went to the D2 level, brought in Trinidad Chambliss to compete with Austin Simmons over there, who was a redshirt freshman at the time for the starting job at Ole Miss. Simmons started the season and then dealt with an injury, and Chambliss stepped in, and now Ole Miss in the college football playoff. So maybe Florida State takes a similar route, brings in someone like Stokes, and then him and Kevin Sperry duke it out for the starting job. But either way, I think other options at quarterback are going to continue to emerge for Florida State. I know a lot of people are saying Colton Joseph. That could be one, but that's also going to be a guy who's going to fetch a hefty bag in the portal, likely one of the top QBs on the market in this transfer portal cycle. So we'll see how it goes for Florida State. This will probably be one of many.
Yeah, and we've got a lot to talk about on that front. So that's the quarterback situation. I want to note on that as we continue to move forward. Also, too, some news here that broke yesterday. I believe this is from On3's Brett McMurphy. Florida State turning down to play in a bowl game. Thoughts on this one, D-Lou? Florida State, Auburn, UCF, Baylor, and Rutgers were all the teams that had chances to play, that all had 5 wins, but elected not to participate. And I think we'll talk a little bit further, too, when we have VZ on Wednesday evening's show to talk about maybe this is something that Florida State should have done back in 2023 instead of going to face Georgia in that Orange Bowl game. But, Florida State not electing to play in a bowl game where they had the opportunity.
I don't think this should be shocking. It shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, Florida State, it's been 9 days.
Like the fans are saying in the comments, thank God they did not want to play one more.
It's been 9 days since this team had its season ended in Gainesville, finishing 5-7. And at the time, everyone was pretty resigned to the fact that Florida State was not going to a bowl game, was not participating in the postseason for the 4th time in Mike Norvell's 6 seasons at FSU. And since then, we've already seen some transfer portal departures, obviously now some coaching staff changes. Daryl Jackson Jr. put out his declaration for the 2025 NFL draft. We'll see about Earl Little Jr. He's received a Shrine Bowl invite, and it seems like he could maybe go and take a shot at the pros as well, rather than coming back to FSU in 2026. Same thing with Deuce. Tommy had that waiver denied. So I think the focus right now for Florida State, it's away from the football field. It's fully to the offseason. Who knows how many of these guys are even still in Tallahassee at this point as the semester finishes up and guys are making decisions, whether, like I talked about, some of those guys going pro, but some of the guys that could enter the transfer portal as well. So, Florida State did not realize this was an opportunity 9 days ago. It's kind of just popped up in their lap, and that's what happened with Kansas State, Iowa State, both electing to decline to participate in bowl games despite being bowl eligible. due to coaching changes. Kansas State's head coach retired. Iowa State's head coach obviously went over there to be the head coach at Penn State. And then Notre Dame, shocked the entire country yesterday when they were snubbed from the college football playoff and said they will not participate in a bowl game this postseason.
So, an hour or two, maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of why the option is on the table. I just think, for some of these programs that have already started their offseason, it's too late to ask them to come back and play another game.
Poor Terrell over here. He said, I wouldn't mind a bowl game. He likes pain. So
it would have been a nice opportunity for Florida State to get, an extra 3 weeks of practice or so for some of the younger players on the team.
You would have just want to see Sperry. That's about it.
You don't even know which of those younger guys are going to be back at Florida State in 2026 whenever that transfer portal opens up on January 2nd. So, it's a good idea in theory, but in execution, Florida State, these other programs that declined the bowl game opportunity, they've already moved on to the offseason.
Mm-hmm. I'll be honest with you, too. If you're not playing in Doak, if the bowl game's not in Doak, you couldn't find Pop-Tart Bowl to get you in there or the Sun Bowl. Could they move it all the way across the country into Doak? I don't think you want to see FSU play in a bowl game outside of Doak Campbell Stadium. I don't think you do at all. I think they could even move to where the circus, not the circus, but where the Marching Chiefs practice, and they could just, do a 2-minute walk over to that field and play on there, and they wouldn't win. I think you wanted to go ahead and say it's over. 2025 is done. You don't want to play in a bowl game. You don't want to do that to yourself. Why would you want to do that to yourself? And who's going to go? Who wants to see that product at all? No. End it. More of the focus needs to be on the offseason anyways. Unless someone was willing to give you $50 million to go play in your bowl game, that could help.
It's a 5-7 football team. What bowl game do you think Florida State would realistically go to? Well, I'm sorry. The only bowl game that was open.
Was it Birmingham? Was it going to be the Birmingham Bowl?
The JLAB Birmingham Bowl.
Well, I already told you I'm not going to that.
I'm not sure how excited Florida State fans would have been to travel over there for that one.
And who would they have faced?
Georgia Southern, I believe.
Yeah, this one's also too saving some face here. You don't want to maybe put that out there. I don't think you need to even market that. So yeah, probably they're right here in the right.
You think Georgia Southern would go belt to ass?
It's a road game, brother.
They still have Clay Helton over there, the former USC coach.
Is that what he said? I'm just stating. I'm being obvious over. This is straight facts, Terrell. They're god awful on the road, man. God awful. I don't even think maybe that'd be too far to go to the fairgrounds and play there in that stadium. I wouldn't want to do that either. So
Georgia Southern 6-6 in 2025. I don't know. It'd be a close one.
That would have been a battle. Could have been top 5 and viewer ratings for that one right there on the CW network. All right, let's move on here real quick before we get into some sleeper picks for Monday Night Football. Pat Surtain, as we know, got let go from Florida State. Was shocking, stunning to a lot of the fans. Also to us on here, weren't really expecting that move to happen. And Pat Surtain certainly had a statement to make right afterward and said, that fired shit hit different. Gave everything for 3 years. I guess 4 years matter more than 40. Bet. Coach, super good, y'all. This went viral. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure it's sitting at 6,000 to 7,000 likes on Twitter, which I wonder how many views that means. I'll look at it here in a second. But also, too, I believe his son put out not like that, not kind of comment like that, but was backing his father as well. A little stunned by the news that his dad got let go, but certainly they, I don't think Coach Pat and, Mike, I don't think they ended on the greatest of terms there for his last year at FSU.
Yeah, and, there were some rumors out there that maybe Patrick Surtain Sr. was looking around at other jobs, or that this was maybe a mutual parting of ways between Florida State and Surtain Sr. I think that statement tells you all. He is not happy about the way this went down and how his time ended in Tallahassee. And, I think it ultimately just comes down to, him, Tony White coming in as defensive coordinator. I don't think him and Surtain Sr. necessarily mesh, two guys with different styles. And we'll see what Florida State decides to do from here. Obviously, bringing in a defensive ends coach to work with Terrence Knighton. Right now, you've got Evan Cooper there at safeties coach. It sounds like Florida State is potentially interested in bringing in a cornerbacks coach to shore up that defensive backfield coaching room. So we'll see how it goes here for Florida State. But I still think, this is just not a good look, not a good move for Florida State for this to be the only guy that you've let go so far, and for it to be Patrick Surtain Sr. anyway. I know there's been some stuff left to be desired as far as the recruiting trail and finishing there. And I mean, you've lost a couple guys to flips over the last couple years, but I mean, he's put some guys in the NFL. Obviously, had a true freshman starting this year, and the cornerback room wasn't particularly deep after you had some guys go down due to injury like Jabril and Quindarius Jones. But Patrick Surtain Sr., I mean, he had vast connections in South Florida as a former coach there at American Heritage High School, where he won multiple state championships. Obviously, his NFL connections. I think, doing something like this, and with the way it seems like it was done, Patrick Surtain Sr. not happy about it. It's another move that doesn't make Florida State look very good.
No, it doesn't look great. And 2.1 million views. A lot of people saw that tweet there. Almost 10,000 likes.
And a lot of Florida and Miami fans are saying, come over here, big dog.
Yeah, they probably are definitely recruiting him over there. But yeah, I mean, didn't seem like they ended off on good terms with one another. And like you said, there's definitely some things that you could say from the secondary that lacked. But also too, you brought in Evan Cooper. You changed things up with Tony White coming in, like you just mentioned. Like things were altered for Surtain, and you could say the recruiting things here and there, yada yada yada. But I don't think, if we're talking about concerns of this team moving forward, Pat would not be that highly on that tier ranking, D'Lo.
No, there are some other guys who certainly should be on the chopping block ahead of Surtain Sr. And it's pretty damning for Florida State to make that move and follow it up with nothing else. I mean, some of the same positions where you've been failing for years and years, those guys are still there and not a peep.
Nope. We are it's almost 1:00 on Monday, 2 weeks after the season. Championship window is over, D'Lo.
I guess that comprehensive evaluation takes a while. I don't know.
It's still going on, I guess. It's still going on. And like you had mentioned, though, still got some position groups that aren't so pretty. I mean, we already talked about a handful of them earlier in this episode, but I mean, come on now. Come on. Got to get going here and see who else is up next, because that surprises Pat as being the first one out of here.
And that could lead to some of these guys on the roster. Jabril Rawls, who had a career season. I mean, looks like a promising future piece. Like, we'll see how many of these DBs come back. And Patrick Surtain Sr. coached Earl Little Jr. at American Heritage, and then they obviously reunited together at Florida State. I know Pat is the cornerbacks coach and didn't coach the safeties this year, but Little Jr. had a career year, and now it seems like he's really considering moving on and leaving Florida State for the NFL. We'll see what happens with some of these guys. I think it's definitely a concern and something to watch.
Yeah, I believe he posted on his Instagram story of him being at the East, or not being at, but he got sent a box for the East-West Shrine Bowl as well. And, that, you lean to think that's that he's headed to the NFL, heading to the next part, hopefully heading to the pros. But, like you had said, the relationships there, certainly Jabril Rawls. I mean, that's your top guy in the secondary that you want to have coming back into next season. And not only that, not only just play well, but like just the energy, the way that he played, you wish that you had 11 more of those 11s out there. That's just the tenacity that he was playing with. Good at tackling, making plays for you, takeaways as well. Jabril Rawls needs to be at Florida State next season. Pat Surtain leaving, like you just said, he's, that plays a vital effect, I think, more than what you had with like David Johnson and Usman Chroma, because that was Mike Norvell. He was after him, recruiting him, and NIL played a big factor. But Jabril Rawls, that was up to Pat Surtain in that relationship. That was, and you can't lose Rawls.
Jabril was a 3-star coming out of high school. I mean, I remember we were leaving practice one day and he randomly committed, and you know, it was a 3-star. I wasn't really expecting it at the time, and we've seen what he's now developed into over the last couple of years. And part of that is just due to Jabril's work ethic and the mindset he carries himself with, and part of that is due to Patrick Surtain Sr. and what he's done at Florida State for the last 3 years. So definitely something to keep an eye on here, because he's gonna be back channeled, and he's gonna receive some big offers,
Yeah. No, and I'm sure those conversations are happening as we speak. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make some sleeper picks. Shout out to Sleeper. We've got a big Monday Night Football game here. We've got the Chargers and the Eagles in this one, D-Lou. And we almost got our Sunday picks correct. Baker Mayfield had an atrocious game. We only needed him to throw, what was it? We needed him to throw 219 yards, and he threw 122. 8-chain hit for us. Shador Sanders exploded 364 yards. But yeah, Baker Mayfield, was a rainy day, but still, nonetheless, it was just absolutely catastrophic. I feel bad for any of the Bucs fans that are here in the chat viewing. That was an awful, awful, awful game. Disgusting. But D-Lo, we've got some good promos here from Sleeper. I believe we can just have Jalen Hurts throw for 1 yard, and that's a free pick for a 1.78 times. Oh, I can't have the promotion on there to add that in there. Do I take away the promo, or it's a free entry, though? This is a free entry.
We got to go with the free one.
Sleeper's amazing. Okay, let's do that. Well, this is not Marion Hampton.
First game back off IR.
Ooh. And his last couple of games before that, he went well over on his more. A lot of people are pushing into the 25. I don't like that, but I could be down for this. Philly, though, I'm not sure.
I'm just like, how many carries is he going to get, though? First game back. That's what I'm worried about.
I know, right? Well, let's just keep that eye on that one. Saquon Barkley, anytime touchdown. Where is this at? Is this at the Chargers? Yeah, it is.
Yep.
Okay. Anytime touchdown. AJ Brown, anytime. What is the passing for both of these guys? Of course, they've got Jalen where he just needs to get one. We'd have to go Herbert here. He's been lacking as of late on air. 81 yards, 151 yards, 209 they're expecting to go against on Philly. You want to shave this to 175?
I'd be fine with it.
That's not bad. And you get 1.22 times. We need to find a juicer, though. Where's the rushing yards for Saquon? 67.5. He's also had some inconsistency. Yeah. It's so inconsistent.
Disappointing season.
Yeah. After a strong start, it's kind of just fallen off there.
That's what happens when I take someone in fantasy.
Dude.
Fall off a cliff.
Yep. 100%. Jalen Hurts has been running the ball quite a bit. As of late, last 3 games, 31 yards, 33, 31. Could shave him down to 25.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. We'll do that.
I think AJ Brown had like his best game of the season last week.
Oh, yeah, he did. And he's on a 2 times juicer. He needs 62.5 on the more. But, yeah, he went off and had 132 last weekend. He's only expected to get at 62.5. Do we want to go to just shave him to 50, call it a night? That's a 1.34 times. We just got to get a win here, and we got a $20 free bet here from Sleeper. Shout out to Sleeper.
That's a good point.
Yeah. That's not bad. Those aren't bad picks. So we got Justin Herbert, 175 plus in the passing yards. AJ Brown just needs to have 50 receiving yards. And then Jalen Hurts, 25 plus there.
You want to do one more or no?
Say it again?
You want to do one more?
Yeah, I think we need to do one more. One more. Who's going to get into what's hot right now? A touchdown? If anybody? I can't trust too much more of this Eagles offense. I'd rather, if we're going to go somewhere, maybe we lean. Where is
What's
homeboy at?
McConkey looking like?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. 50 and a
50.
half. Whew. Last couple games, 13
Mm.
yards, 39. But is he due for a bounce back? And it's on prime time. It's at the Chargers. McConkey, whenever I watch him, he usually does well in prime time. Want to shame the 40 since we're having another pick in here?
Let's do it.
All right. We'll do that. We'll stick with those guys. Appreciate Sleeper, as always, for partnering with us this season. Oh, this isn't recognized. What's that? What does that mean? Weird. I don't know. Maybe we had to do something else on there.
Pain.
Okay. Well, we did that. You can always add more if you'd like. But shout out to Sleeper. Appreciate them for joining us this entire football season, helping us make some picks. Hopefully those hit. If not, this is not our calling. This is not our calling. Well, let's go and finish off this episode. We've got one more thing to hit on, and this is Florida State losing one of their, I believe, really promising true freshman defensive ends with LaJesse Harold. And we had already talked pretty heavily about the edge room for the Seminoles earlier on in this episode. So if you're just now joining, I suggest going and scrubbing back to the beginning of the show. But Florida State's losing 6'5", 253-pound defensive end LaJesse Harold, one of their top guys that they brought through their recruiting class this last year as a senior in high school. He totaled 38 tackles, 16 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery, 1 interception, and 6 pass deflections. I mean, it stands out to you right away with 11 sacks. The staff was working really hard there at the end of the recruiting cycle to make sure that they brought in LaJesse Harold. But I think this one was kind of surprising. And we didn't see a lot of LaJesse Harold in his true freshman year. Of course, we saw the Desir twins, and you got to wonder if that plays a factor into him. Moving on, but thoughts on this one, D. Lou?
Yeah, this was always an upside take for Florida State. And like you kind of mentioned, Logan, a big addition late in that 2025 recruiting class for Florida State. They were able to flip him from LSU and keep him in the Sunshine State. And, this was a guy, once he got to Tallahassee, he needed to develop. I think last spring we were talking about, or in the spring, he came into Florida State only about 210, 215 pounds or so, and really had an explosion of weight over the offseason to bulk up to that 250 plus pound frame that he has now. And once the season started, he dealt with an injury for the majority of the campaign, was only able to get out there for 1 appearance, and that came in the 42-7 win against Wake Forest. Saw action late in the 4th quarter.
Mm-hmm.
That was, so I think injuries really decimated his first season at the college level. Florida State was pretty excited to see what he could be with that weight added onto that frame, and it was going to be a big offseason for him to see if he could become a contributor in that defensive end room. But, regardless, he's moving on, 4 seasons of eligibility remaining. We'll see where he lands at and what he's able to develop into, because I do believe he's someone with a pretty high ceiling, but also a low floor as well if he's not able to develop some of those physical attributes.
Yeah, and I see some comments in here. It's tough. You have the Desir twins in here, and that makes an impact for playing time and such. And I'm sure the injury did not help, but development, and I don't know if he knew about the new hire with Nick Williams coming in, and you could still work on retaining here. The intentions of entering the transfer portal. That can happen. We've seen it a handful of times across the college football landscape, along with definitely Florida State, where guys will say, hey, I'm going to put my name out there, but I might take it back and come back to FSU, yada, yada, yada. We've seen that happen before.
Yep.
So not saying that, he's gone, but I'm sure the Desir twins also too, just the development factor at the end of the day. And that when that's lacking and you don't have that going for you, I don't, don't blame some guys. And definitely too, whenever you see James Williams out there playing over you, felt like I could have gone in for a few reps at some points, man. I can go at least set the edge right there. Come on, set the edge. But I think, and you know what? I lost that bet. I made a bet with you guys. I made a bet I don't know what the bet really was. It was just a verbal one. I don't know if I had to do anything, but I said that, throughout his career between him and Tylon Lee, Jesse Harold would end with more sacks and have better stat sheet at the end of his career.
How'd that work out for you?
Right now, it's not looking so great for me.
You didn't say, did you say
Nick
at
Williams.
Florida State, though? Because now we're going to have to keep track of where he goes.
I don't know if I said at Florida State. Maybe I just kept it generic. Maybe we're going to have to go back and look at this because who knows? Who knows? I mean, he goes off to Ohio State, absolutely balls for me, and I win that bet in 2028. Or maybe
tough.
Nick Williams gets in his ear. Like, come on, buddy. Come on back over here.
Come on back. But as of Monday, Jesse Harold transferring from Florida State, Tylon Lee still at Florida State. So that's looking good for me and Austin, at least.
It is looking good. It is looking solid for you guys. So that's the news on the transfer portal market. I'm sure we are going to get into it a lot more in Wednesday's show with some more news going on, and we'll see if there's some coaching staff changes. If there's some big breaking news, D-Lou and I will hop on here for a quick hitter for you guys. But if not, we will see you guys on Wednesday evening. If you're still with us on YouTube, man, y'all have been absolutely crushing it, engaging in the comments, hitting the like button and everything, and just popping in here. We really do appreciate it. Almost doubled in viewership the last couple of weeks. So appreciate y'all a ton. You guys are awesome. And we'll see you guys on Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. We'll have a lot more to talk about too. We'll probably jump into some more quarterback chatter. We'll get VZ's take on a few things. And maybe we'll bring up a couple more Antonio Cromartie tweets for him and see if we can get them riled up a little bit. I think that's always entertaining to see. And we got to talk about Florida State basketball too, because man, they are not looking so great right now at the moment. So we'll talk a little bit further on that, but we'll see you guys Wednesday night, 7 o'clock. Y'all enjoy the rest of y'all's week, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace.